the last module, we spent a lot of time learning about all the structures of the cell. And in this module, we're now going to learn how cells get the energy that they need to do what they have to do. We're going to look at the energy cycle as a whole today, and then we're going to spend time breaking that energy cycle down into pieces and to studying each little part of it. The diagram that I have on the board is very similar to the one that's in your book. I have a couple of differences in it. Energy from the sun is going to be the driving source of anything that happens on Earth. All energy that is utilized is going to come from here. The sunlight shines on the chloroplasts in the plant cells. Those chloroplasts then run photosynthesis to produce glucose and oxygen, which actually for those cells, oxygen is considered a waste product, but thankfully for us, we need that oxygen. So then the glucose and the oxygen are taken into the mitochondria of any type of cell, whether an animal cell or a plant cell, any type of cell at all. Those cells will then do respiration, which we've talked about before. We said respiration is the process that cells use to get the energy out of the food in order to get the energy that they need to operate. So they do respiration, they get the energy that they need, they store it in a form called ATP, and then that produces carbon dioxide and water as its waste products, which the plant cells will then take these products and recycle them again through photosynthesis to make more glucose and more oxygen. So as you can see, this is a continual cycle that's going to keep going over and over and over again to maintain life on our planet. Now, it is very possible that sometimes this glucose can be stored as other carbohydrates. Energy can also be stored as lipids. It can be stored as proteins. The most simple form is glucose, and that's where we're going to focus in this particular module on the glucose. But do be aware that energy can be stored in other forms as well. Now we're going to dive into each individual part of this diagram. We're going to finish up today by talking about what ATP actually is. Then the second part of the chapter, we're going to be working on this section of the diagram down here on what photosynthesis really is, what it means, how it works. And then the third part of the chapter, we're going to focus on this part of the diagram where we're talking about respiration. So let's talk about ATP to begin with. The author uses a really good analogy where she says glucose is like a gold nugget and ATP is like a dollar bill. Gold nugget isn't something that you can just take to the store and use to buy anything. You've got to have that kind of broken down into smaller pieces, into dollar bills or into the currency of whatever country where you happen to be living in order to be able to actually trade and do business with it. Gold nuggets are still very, very valuable, but they're not useful as far as everyday trade. And so similarly, the glucose in a cell is like a gold nugget, which it's great, it's a source of energy, but in order for the plant or animal cell to use it, it's got to be broken down into ATP, into a spendable type of currency. So what is ATP exactly? Well, ATP stands for Adenosine Triphosphate. We talked about adenine before when we talked about DNA, real briefly, and hopefully that you'll remember that this hexagon on this side of it just means that I have a ring made out of 6 carbon atoms, and there are also going to be hydrogen atoms kind of hanging off each one of these carbons. The pentagon is going to represent a 5 carbon ring. So these 2 rings together are classified as adenine. When they are bonded to a 5 carbon sugar, the 2 pieces together are called adenosine. And so this is adenosine triphosphate. A phosphate group is a phosphorus atom and 3 oxygen atoms all bonded together. So you can tell that this is a shortcut for a very, very large molecule. There are 3 phosphate groups that are all bonded together and then bonded to the sugar. Now, each one of these bonds, and not just the bonds between the phosphates, but any bond in any chemical compound, bonds always hold energy within them. It takes energy to break bonds, and there's always going to be energy released when you do that. You can almost think of it like a big game of Red Rover. And so the phosphate groups are holding hands with each other, and you know that in order to break those bonds, you've got to kind of exert some energy to get the bond broken, but then there's also a lot of energy that's released once that bond is broken. And so what happens is that one of these phosphates is broken off, and I'm left with adenosine diphosphate, or ADP, because there's only 2 groups left down here. So I break the bond, but the other thing that happens is that there's a huge release of energy, and I really should have had that written down here in order so that my equation is actually balanced. So there's the energy that is released. So what happens then is that whenever the cell needs energy for anything, whether it's trying to reproduce, whether it's trying to pull in some sort of other organism for food or some molecule for food, whether it's trying to get rid of waste, no matter what it's trying to do that requires energy, it's going to take this ATP, it's going to break this bond and get this huge release of energy off of it and do whatever work that it needs, and then it's going to be left with ADP and P behind. And then the food that it intakes will help it recycle this ADP and the P back into ATP again. This is a very efficient way to recycle the same materials so that energy can be stored and then energy can be utilized. You can really think of ATP almost like a rechargeable battery. You know that if you have a cell phone, you use it all day, and then at the end of the day, you've got to plug it back in to recharge it so you can use it again the next day. Well, this is basically the same thing. I can take the battery, I can use it, and then once I've used all the energy out of it, then I've got to plug it back in, so to speak, by using food and then gaining that energy out of that to recycle this back into a form that I can use again. Now, I do want to tell you as we move into the photosynthesis and respiration parts of this chapter that the reading is not something that when you sit down and read this for the first time, you're going to be able just to, read it real quick, run your eyes over it real fast and understand what she's saying. Because these are very complex chemical processes and we are really just scratching the surface of them. I want to encourage you to really read the reading assignments in this chapter slowly. Look at the diagrams as you're reading them. I will make videos to help you understand all of the processes, but do be aware that you're not going to be able to read this quickly and make any sense out of it. You're going to have to really take it slow and try to process each individual step. I will also tell you that for me, the best way that I learn and understand things is to draw diagrams and to color code things. So we're going to be doing a lot of that in this chapter to help you understand the processes of photosynthesis and respiration.